Hi, welcome back to Cooking with the Pastor, where we create holy home cookies for you and your family. Just kidding. That would be an interesting TV show, but we're not doing that. I am making cookies today, and it got me thinking about how you have a recipe and you have to follow that recipe to the T. You have to think about what's going to be the outcome. And even with baking, there's people that take flares that, sometimes it calls for 1 bag of chips, and I'm tempted to put 2 bags of chips in just because I love chocolate chips. Or when I'm making cookies, I could throw a bunch of M&Ms in there and crush up Oreos. That would be an amazing idea or concept, and I have the freedom to do that. But when I think about how adding those elements change the dynamics of the dough as it cooks, it's going to alter what's on the other side when I pull it out of the oven. And so really, when you're baking especially, you have to really be mindful of what goes in, and there's a reason why there's so much of each element that really you don't have, and just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should, because it affects the outcome. And as we're talking about community, last week we were talking about community of what are elements that keep us from experiencing community. I've continued thinking about this and thinking about how community, what we bring to the table, as we enter into community, there's things that we can do, there's things that our attitude, our actions affect community and whether it is successful or not. And I was thinking about Paul's words in Ephesians chapter 4, and it begins, or verse 17, he starts talking about how living as the Lord, like living as children of the light, we have an example. And I think it's easy to hold on to that and have some you might call some vague ideas of what it means to be as children of the light. But the problem with that is then I can start to interpret it how I want and do things in order what's for my best interest. But Paul goes on later on in verse 25 and is very practical. And I think it's things that we as Christians need to read, these practical elements of community, and take them into practice, because the only way we're going to get the outcome that Christ desires is if we listen to what he says and do exactly what the recipe calls for. And so Paul goes on, stop telling lies. Let us tell our neighbors the truth, for we are all parts of the same body. Don't sin by letting anger control you. Don't let the sun go down while you're still angry, for anger gives a foothold to evil. If you're a thief, stop stealing. Instead, use your hands for good work, and then give generously to others in need. Don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear it. Now, we can say whatever we want. And in fact, there's times, and I've actually heard people say, especially the past couple of weeks, well, I can do what I want, I can say what I want because I can. And you're right. But when we talk about Christian community, when we talk about community, God lays out specifics in order to create a better community. And he says, let your language be good and helpful. Let it be an encouragement to others. And lately, I've listened, whether it's on the news or in social media, people saying what they want, people not being encouraging, not being helpful, not being good in their language, or not just their language, but the way that they speak and what they're talking about and how they talk about things. And there's times where you want to say something, but honestly, it's not needed. And so God calls us as as we enter into community, to be mindful of how we are talking to each other. If your words are not going to encourage someone, if your words are not going to be grace-filled, if your words are not going to be good and helpful to that moment, to that person, to that time, God says, zip it. Don't say it. And you are saying, but I want to, I think I should. God doesn't care that you think you should say that. What matters is if you are being good and encouraging and helpful. And just because you think you can, and you're right, you do have the freedom to say whatever you want. But we as believers are called into community. Community is all about the redemption, the healing of the whole community. The very biblical understanding of salvation isn't just me, but it's all of us. Jesus is a great example because honestly, he could have said whatever he wanted to anyone he wanted, and he had every right because he is God. But did he say what he wanted? No. In fact, he was very grace-filled in ways that he handled people. As he entered into situations, he spoke words that were encouraging. He spoke words that were challenging. He spoke words that were helpful and good for that moment. Calvary, if we are going to live in community, we need to take these things serious. We need to be mindful of our words that we're saying. We need to be mindful of each other because we are all at our strongest when we've worked to make everyone strong. That's community. Be mindful of your words. Be mindful of your actions. Are they helpful? Are they encouraging? Are they Christ-like? And if they're not, don't add them into the batch. Now I'm going to get back to my cookies. Have a great day.